Mom and Dad cut me off after Golden Sister's lies. She cheated, I stayed friends with ex. Now I'm rich, she's begging to fund her wedding. Be me, 29 years old. Twin sister Jessica hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. Made our parents stop talking to me too. Most absurd reason you can imagine. Let me tell you the whole story. Jessica was getting divorced from her husband Nathan. Nathan happened to be my best friend. We met back in college, became really close. Sister and I were never close though. We're twins, but she's 16 minutes younger. Always treated like the baby of the family. The golden child. Parents were soft on her, tough on me. Created a lot of resentment growing up. Jessica always got her way. Spoiled brat. Not easy to get along with. Remember when Nathan first saw her? Found a family photo on my social media. Immediately asked me to introduce them. Said he was completely smitten. Initially refused, but he wouldn't give up. Kept asking for weeks. Finally talked to Jessica about it. Nathan was a good friend. Didn't see any harm in introducing them. She agreed to meet him. They started dating in first year of college. Together for 6 years before getting engaged. Was genuinely happy for them. Their relationship actually made Jessica bearable to be around. Was Nathan's best man at the wedding. Couldn't have been prouder. 2 years into marriage, everything fell apart. Jessica cheated on Nathan with a coworker. Nathan found out by checking her phone. When he confronted her, she admitted to being bored, claimed the affair meant nothing, even offered to break it off, said they could work on their marriage. But Nathan wasn't interested. Understandably so. He left her immediately. The divorce got really ugly. What made it worse was Jessica's audacity. She demanded alimony, even though she was the one who cheated, and had a steady job at the time. I sided with Nathan through the whole divorce. Because frankly, Jessica was completely in the wrong. We weren't close anyway. This didn't sit well with her at all. She went crying to our parents, complained that I was being disloyal, said that as family I should automatically be on her side. For some ridiculous reason, our parents actually agreed with her. They called a family meeting, told me I needed to cut ties with Nathan because he had wronged Jessica. Told them it was completely ridiculous. Nathan had been my friend for years. Wouldn't abandon him just because Jessica made bad choices. If Nathan had been the one who cheated, it would have been different. But Jessica was clearly in the wrong here. Jessica got absolutely furious. Accused me of sabotaging her divorce settlement. Even said I was jealous of her. Finally lost my patience with her. Told her straight up she didn't deserve anything. Because she had no morals or ethics. The argument got really heated. Had to leave early before things got worse. A few days later got a call from parents. They were cutting me off completely. Because Jessica had given them an ultimatum. Either they choose her or they lose her. Unsurprisingly, they chose her. They even told me I could fix everything. All I had to do was cut Nathan out of my life. But by that point, it had become a matter of principle. Just wished them well and stopped speaking to them. 3 years have passed since then. Nathan and I are still good friends. Haven't spoken to my family at all. See them occasionally in passing. We just avoid each other. It hurts that my parents chose Jessica over me, but I've come to terms with it. Recently, my parents decided to visit me. Not to apologize, unfortunately. They came to ask for my help. I've been making good money lately. My business has really taken off. Own this amazing bistro downtown. After getting an incredible review from a popular food blogger, customers started pouring in. Been absolutely packed for months. Guess my parents did the math. Decided to reach out because they needed money. Plot twist. They didn't need it for themselves. It was for Jessica. Apparently, she's getting married again. Must have downplayed her relationship with that coworker. You know, the one she had the affair with. Because that's who she's marrying. They've been together since her divorce. Got engaged a couple months ago. I knew about it. Not like I was going to be invited to the wedding. Didn't think much about it at the time. About 4 days ago, my parents showed up at my door. Was pretty surprised to see them. They were being polite enough, so I invited them in. Didn't just shut the door in their faces. First, because I'm not that kind of person. Second, because I made the mistake of assuming. Thought they were here to mend things. Maybe even apologize. That was my mistake. After some small talk about my life and business, they finally got to the point. Told me Jessica was getting married again. Wanted to make it a grand event. She wanted people to forget about her first wedding. Only remember this one. Sounded exactly like something Jessica would do. Wasn't surprised at all. Then they started talking about the budget. Said the wedding was going to cost at least $50K for the luxurious event Jessica wanted. That was absolutely shocking. We weren't the kind of family that could afford something like that. Dad was a recently retired architect. Mom was a university chemistry professor. Both earned decent money when they worked. Had saved reasonably for their future. But spending $50K on a wedding was unthinkable. My parents explained the situation. Wedding was still several months away. Said they didn't need the money immediately. Could afford to contribute some from their retirement savings. But there was no way they could cover the full cost. The fiancé's family had already said they couldn't help, but my parents didn't want Jessica to feel disappointed, so they had already committed to covering the entire wedding cost. That was before Jessica started planning, before she shared the actual budget. Now they didn't know what to tell her. No way they could pay for it, not without seriously affecting their retirement funds. They didn't want to let her down. We're trying to figure out what to do. Eventually heard from some people that my bistro was doing well. Took it as a sign from the universe to visit me. Talk about contributing to the wedding expenses. They told me this wedding meant everything to Jessica. After her divorce from Nathan, she had to go to therapy because of how traumatizing the experience had been for her. Now they said I had the chance to be a good brother for once. Contribute to her wedding. Reminded me the last time Jessica asked for something. I refused, and we didn't talk for 3 years. Now they said I had an opportunity to fix things by covering the wedding costs. To be honest, I thought they were joking. There was no way they could seriously believe that I'd help even if I were a billionaire. I wouldn't have contributed a single cent to Jessica's wedding. And I told them exactly that. Of course, I said it after laughing in their faces. Couldn't believe they had the audacity to come to me after 3 years without even apologizing and act like I was the one in the wrong for cutting ties with them instead of with Nathan. After my laughing and refusing, my parents were deeply offended. Instead of leaving, they started arguing, said there was nothing funny about the situation, claimed Jessica was right all along, that I had no sense of family loyalty. Even now, when being presented with a golden opportunity to mend things with my sister, I was refusing to help. This time, my parents went even further, accused me of being jealous and insecure about my sister, also called me incredibly stingy. That really set me off. Could understand Jessica saying those things. She's delusional and selfish. But my parents knew exactly what they had done. I completely lost it. Told them they had no right to lecture me about family loyalty, because they were the reason Jessica and I didn't get along. Reminded them how they always treated us differently, how they spoiled her excessively, expected me to put up with everything. Told them they had failed as parents. That's why Jessica had become a selfish monster, who didn't even care about them. She thought it was perfectly fine to ask them to pay for such a lavish wedding. Added that it was their fault, that even I, their son, wasn't willing to help them. Maybe they thought at least one of their children cared. But if Jessica truly cared, she wouldn't have asked them to cover the cost. She would have done the math, realized it was way beyond the budget of a moderately successful architect and professor. She would have scaled down the wedding, or figured out a way to pay for it herself. But she didn't care about any of that. She only cared about herself. As for me, I didn't feel the need to care about my parents either. It's not like they cared about me. At the end of the day, it was their own behavior. That left them with 2 children, who didn't bother thinking about them. They had no one to blame but themselves. After I said all this, Mom started crying. Dad cursed at me before leaving with her. In the moment, I didn't feel bad at all. Was too angry to care. But a few hours later, got a text from my dad. Said he was deeply disappointed in me. Claimed my words had broken his heart. Said Mom was in terrible shape because of me. Started wondering if I was the bad guy for telling my parents that their 2 children don't care about them and that it's their own fault. Update after a week of thinking. Reading some responses from others. It's clear I have nothing to feel guilty about. Been a week since I spoke to them. Now I've blocked them completely. It's ironic that Dad unblocked me, just to send that guilt-tripping message. Considering he hadn't bothered to check on me in 3 years, only shows how selfish and insensitive they are. For the record, I don't care about their feelings. Because I truly don't. That's the truth about Nathan. Yes, he knew Jessica was getting married again. She posted about her engagement a couple months ago. That's when he found out. So he's been aware for some time, and is completely fine with it. Their divorce was really messy and awful for both of them. I guess the whole process helped him get over her. Now he has no feelings for her at all. He didn't date anyone for a while after the divorce. But last year, he started seeing people again. He's doing well now. We try to catch up every couple weekends. When I told Nathan about my parents' visit and their request for me to pay for Jessica's second wedding, he said I did the right thing by refusing. We even laughed about how Jessica apparently had to go to therapy after the divorce because she was so traumatized. According to what we remember, it was Jessica who lied about Nathan to make him look like the villain during the divorce, just so she could get the alimony she wanted and justify her infidelity. I honestly don't understand why she needed therapy when she was the one traumatizing everyone else. Anyway, I've decided to keep my distance from my parents. Stop talking to them again. That's the best thing for my mental health. I hope they don't contact me again. I'd hate to have to get dragged back into this mess. Second update about the whole situation. About 2 weeks ago, my parents paid me a visit. That meeting didn't end well at all. Afterward, I blocked them. Hoped they wouldn't contact me again. But today they called me again. Must have used a disposable phone. Didn't recognize the number. They called while I was working. Was quite distracted at the time. Ended up answering. Thought it might be an important call. As soon as I heard Dad's voice, was about to hang up, but he said he was outside my bistro. Said he was desperate to talk to me. Insisted on meeting for coffee. Said he couldn't leave without speaking to me. Tried to tell him I was busy at work. Would be tied up for the next several hours. But he said he was willing to wait. He sounded really desperate. Started feeling a little worried. Reluctantly agreed to meet him. Otherwise, he might have come into my bistro. Could have caused a scene. He didn't explicitly say that, but it felt like a possibility. Was the last thing I wanted. After the call, couldn't focus on work. Was too distracted and upset. Decided to take a break. Went to meet him at the cafe nearby, as he'd mentioned. Wasn't far, so I walked there. When I saw him sitting inside, approached him right away. Told him what he was doing was completely unacceptable. Said he couldn't show up at my workplace. Harassed me because he wanted money. To my surprise, he said, he wasn't there to talk about money. Wanted to talk about my mom. That caught me off guard completely. He explained everything. After our last conversation, Mom had completely broken down. Hadn't been the same since, even though 2 weeks had passed. She hadn't recovered at all. Had become a shadow of her former self. He said there was only one thing that could help her. Me visiting her and talking to her. My dad also seemed genuinely distressed, which put me in a very difficult position. I didn't want to hurt him intentionally. But at the same time, I didn't feel obligated to visit my mom. She hadn't bothered to reach out to me. In the last 3 years, our relationship had been terrible for a long time. After thinking it over carefully, told my dad I didn't have the time to go see her. Even if I agreed to visit, I didn't know what he expected me to say. It would be a lie to say I'd forgiven them, because I hadn't. I couldn't forgive them, especially since they'd never apologized. My dad became visibly upset. When I said I wouldn't visit my mom, he said she was in an extremely bad emotional state because of what I had said last time about neither of their children caring about them. To be fair, my mom has always been very sensitive and emotionally fragile. It didn't take much to make her cry or hurt her feelings. Even when we were kids, everyone in the family knew. We had to tread carefully when speaking to her. I agreed with him that my mom is a deeply sensitive person, but I'm also a sensitive person. And if she can't move past things, neither can I. I tried to explain this to my dad, but he insisted that I needed to put our differences aside for once and visit her because she had completely broken down. At one point, we were just going in circles. Finally had to put my foot down. Firmly told him I wasn't going to visit anyone. Not until both of them apologized to me. Even then, I would need time to think it over. Reminded him that for the past 3 years, they hadn't spoken to me at all. And before that, they hadn't treated me well. Naturally, it had become very difficult to see them the same way I used to, or to care about them anymore. I've built a life for myself without them. They didn't seem to care about me until they needed something, whether it was me or more specifically my money. Also mentioned how hurt I'd been when they cut me out of their lives, but that didn't seem to matter to them at the time. They hadn't reached out to me or checked on me afterward, even though I was deeply affected. Feeling hurt and frustrated, told my dad I wouldn't visit mom and that I was very busy, warned him that if he harassed me at work again, I wouldn't hesitate to call the police. Also told him I didn't want them visiting me anywhere, not just at work. Made it clear I was serious, then left to return to my bistro. Had a lot to take care of. Thought he might try something else later in the day, but fortunately nothing happened. Don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm exhausted by all of this. Regret ever letting them back into my life in the first place. Third update on the situation. I'm back, but thankfully not because of my parents. Well, technically yes, but at least not directly. Still haven't had to speak with them. Before I get into the update, want to address someone who said, I should have called the police on my dad. Accused me of being a pushover for not doing so. Guess you've never run a bistro. If you had, you'd know. It's terrible for business to have police show up in the middle of service. If I hadn't agreed to meet him, he probably would have come inside, caused a scene which would have been just as bad, if not worse. People pay to enjoy a peaceful dining experience, not to deal with someone shouting or to watch the police walk in. Anyway, moving on to the actual update. Even though I haven't had a good relationship with my immediate family for the past 3 years, I've managed to maintain positive relationships with other relatives. Everyone knows we had a falling out years ago, that we haven't been in contact since. They also know the reason why, but no one wanted to get involved in the drama, so they've stayed neutral. For events like weddings, birthdays, or parties, they've invited me and my parents separately. Recently, one of my cousins announced her pregnancy. I noticed my parents hadn't been invited to the party. When I asked about it, she told me it wasn't because of me. Instead, she'd had a minor argument with my sister. A few weeks before the party, this happened around the time my cousin posted her pregnancy announcement online. Apparently, Jessica accused her of trying to steal the spotlight. Jessica believed that my cousin had deliberately gotten pregnant to overshadow her wedding. which had taken place just a couple of months earlier. The accusation was so absurd that my cousin decided to cut ties with her altogether. She didn't want to deal with that kind of negativity while she was pregnant, and honestly, who can blame her? As a result, my cousin decided not to invite my parents to the party. They had taken it upon themselves to contact her parents, accuse my cousin of being selfish and spoiled for making such a big deal about her pregnancy, knowing Jessica's wedding was just a few months prior. Because of this, I was the only one in my family who was invited. My cousin knew I had nothing to do with their behavior, made it clear that the decision to exclude them was entirely based on their own actions, not mine. Still, my parents decided to blame me for it. They went online and made a public statement, claiming they had stayed silent about my jealous and insecure behavior toward Jessica for a long time to protect my reputation. But now, since I had turned the family against them, they felt they had no choice but to speak out. They implied it was my fault that my cousin didn't invite them to the pregnancy announcement party. On top of that, they painted me as the villain for staying friends with Nathan, despite how he had ruined Jessica's mental health. During their divorce, of course, they conveniently left out the fact that Jessica had been cheating on Nathan the entire time. Why would they include that in their post? They called me selfish, insecure, and a loser. They even said they were happy to no longer call me their son because they were going to disinherit me. I wish I could say I cared, but I really don't. Plenty of people sent me the post, since I couldn't see it myself. I'm still blocked by them. I told everyone not to bother arguing with my family because it's clear they've lost all sense of reason. No one who actually matters will believe a word of what they said, so it's not doing any real damage to my reputation. Let them talk. I'm so far above all this nonsense. At the same time, I'm incredibly grateful for the relatives who have supported me. While they've stayed out of the drama so far, I'm confident they'll all steer clear of my parents and Jessica from now on. Fourth update on this whole mess. It's been a couple of months since last update, because honestly, there wasn't much to talk about after the statement my parents posted online, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong. Most of our extended family practically stopped talking to them. I'm sure my parents would have blamed me for that too. But at this point, there was no use making more posts against me. The damage had already been done. They had reached a point of no return. As for me, I was pretty happy without them in my life, and now I'm even happier. Recently learned from a few relatives who are still in touch with my parents that Jessica has apparently cut ties with them. My parents weren't present at her wedding, which took place a few weeks ago, raising a lot of questions. Some relatives decided to ask my parents what was going on. My parents told them they had informed Jessica that her wedding budget was way beyond their means and that they couldn't afford it. This led to a huge fight because Jessica was furious. They had promised to cover all the expenses, but were now going back on their word. My parents explained to her that they had made those promises, assuming her plans would be within a reasonable budget. However, her plans were far too extravagant. They also needed to think about their own future. Since they are now both retired, Jessica didn't take this well. Being the spoiled child she is, she decided to cut them off entirely, make her fiancé and his family pay for the wedding. This forced her to significantly downsize the wedding to something much more modest. She ended up having the wedding without her parents present. Jessica doesn't seem affected by any of this, but my parents are reportedly very upset. From what I've heard, they're extremely disappointed that neither of their children seems to care about them anymore, which is fair because, as I said from the beginning, this is the reality they created for themselves. In any case, I'm doing well, so I don't care much about this. It just goes to show that you can't escape karma. It catches up to you eventually. That's exactly what happened to my parents, and soon enough it will catch up to Jessica too. Honestly, I wish them luck. Fifth update on this crazy situation. Didn't think I'd have anything else to share, but life keeps throwing surprises my way. Here's the latest. First, about Jessica. Karma isn't done with her yet. Recently heard from some relatives that Jessica has been unfaithful to her new husband. From what I've been told, her husband and Jessica no longer work together because he accepted a new job at a different company. This left Jessica at her old workplace. Apparently, she wasted no time starting an affair with a new coworker. I don't know the details, but I do know it's someone who recently joined the company. And keep in mind, it hasn't even been 2 years since her wedding. What I've heard is that Jessica and her husband are going through a marital crisis. There hasn't been any talk of divorce yet, but things aren't looking good. Honestly, I'm surprised, but also not really, given how she behaved during her first marriage. All I can say is that I hope her husband is prepared for what's coming. If there's one thing I've learned about Jessica, it's that she makes outrageous demands during divorces, and she already has experience. Maybe this is karma for him too, though I wouldn't wish Jessica on my worst enemy. As for my parents, I've heard a few new things about them as well. Ever since Jessica cut ties with them, things have only gone downhill. At first, they thought Jessica would come back to them, especially after her new marriage began to show cracks. But that hasn't happened. Jessica is still not speaking to them. I've been told they're becoming increasingly depressed and isolated. Some relatives have tried to reach out to them, but my parents have rejected their help. I think they're starting to realize how their actions have affected the entire family, but they're not ready to admit it or to change. Looks like my sister is heading for her second divorce. At this rate, she might start collecting them.